Passer doucement du français à l'anglais. Alors avec une petite introduction également. C'est une partie de l'information qu'on va vous donner aujourd'hui, c'est tout à fait introductive au Big Data. Après, on va discuter des cas concrets. Et notre présentation sort aussi d'une collaboration que Cristina et moi-même avons pour un projet qui a lieu donc à HEC Paris, et en collaboration aussi avec les centres, sur Big Data and the Law. Et l'objectif à 5 ans, c'est de comprendre comment les Big Data transforment donc la profession des avocats, mais aussi les personnes, les juristes qui travaillent dans les domaines publics. So let me start first with numbers, and we all love numbers. And the first thing is why big data matters. Is it important for businesses and in general for all of us to deal with big data? Well, basically big data means a lot of money in many different sectors. One of the first things that we have is 300 billion is the potential value that the US healthcare system can get from using big data, which is basically the double that Spain spends in healthcare. Other numbers, 250 billion, the potential value for Europe public sector administration. So that's more than Greece's GDP of using big data. 600 billion for consumer surplus, which basically means that by using location services, basically, if you use location services, you may be able, or the global amount of businesses can increase in 600 billion. And 60% increase in retailers, distribution au détail, j'avais cherché les mots aujourd'hui, increase in profits by using big data. So that's a lot of money. But if you are also interested in other numbers, these are good for you. We need, only in the US, 140,000 to 190,000 positions of people that know how to work with big data. And managers, we need 1.5 million managers that are able to understand and work with big data. These are job offers that are currently in the market and are not filled up. These numbers are provided by a study conducted by McKinsey Global Institute. Our presentation today will go from introducing big data, that's what we're going to do now, and then we're going to discuss the uses of big data in the private sector, and then in the public sector, that's where Cristina will take the floor, and then challenges ahead in the public and private sector, and that we open the discussion with you. We both understand and slightly speak French, so we can have the discussion in French if you wish. And I will try to keep some track of French terms during my presentation. So basically, what is big data? Let me introduce big data by saying that there is a trend, is a buzzword. So it's a word that we are using more and more often. And if I can say something, and don't take it badly, and it's not my quotation, people often say that big data is like teenage sex, which basically means that tout le monde parle sur teenage sex, tout le monde le veut, mais personne ne sait comment le faire. Et donc, this very much is what's happened with big data. We all want to do it, we all want to have it, but we don't know how to do it. And the buzzword is actually a bit confusing because there are so many things that are covered under the umbrella of big data. But what is certain is that big data, you see here, this is 2011, so it is a very recent. The word is being used very recently. It's not 10 or 15 years ago, but since 2011, there has been a clear increase in the use of big data. And something very interesting as well, the location, geographical location of countries using the word big data in the world. This is Google, so of course there is an algorithm behind this information already. But it is at least useful to see that the only Western country that is in the top 7 of the countries using big data, the word big data, is the United States. The other ones, even small countries, see Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, Singapore are above any European country using the word, the frequency with which the word is used on Google search engine. Now, this shows that there is a big potential for big data in Europe, and also that big data is out there in different places in the world with different frequencies and different uses, but it is everywhere. And literature shows that there is an increasing number of scholars and people in the practice working on big data and publishing on big data and trying to understand what big data means for businesses today. This is a very famous example of how big data is changing people's lives. So basically, Target, a large supermarket company in the United States, realized that a teenage girl was pregnant even before she did, and not she did, but before her father did. So basically, based on the history of her purchasing history and the changes in her purchasing history, they realized that she was buying some products that were used for pregnant women, and then Target started sending emails and advertisement to her door on pregnancy products. The problem was that the person that collected that information was her father. So her father went to Target and explained that it was not respectful to send that kind of information, especially because she was underage. Well, Target said, "We're really sorry, but this is the information we've collected." And then she talked to her daughter, and then she was effectively pregnant. As you know, all this information is based on some algorithms that are used. And in researching these, I don't really know why Rolex showed up in my search engine, because I don't own a Rolex. I don't want to own a Rolex, but still I have an advertisement of Rolex every time I go on the internet. I have to discover what is going on with Rolex and me. Now, what kind of information was used by Target? Basically, what we call sales point information. So, fidelity card, loyalty card, all the information that is recorded at the sales point, and the purchase history. And based on that information, they process that information and realize there was a change in behavior. But that's only part of what big data is. Let me give you a very basic definition of big data. First of all, big data is usually said to be data that goes above 124 gigabytes in terms of storage. Many people say that it's not about size, which I basically agree. And it is not about size because we have so much information today that it is very easy to go above 124 gigabytes. Very, very easy. And basically the sample information is not important because databases are available. Even open databases are available. So size is really not an issue in big data. Then we're going to discuss whether it is an issue to store data, but at least getting the data, the sample that we usually have when you are having a survey, that you need a certain amount of respondents, it is not an issue anymore for big data. Then what is data in big data? Well, first, structured information. We just mentioned sales records, cash machine. When you go to cash machine and you withdraw money, and then the company registers that information, that's what we call structured information. So basically, there is a predefined form in which the information is recorded, or a specific way of organizing the data that is recorded. So either a form to record information or a way of organizing the data that is recorded. Two different sorts of structured data, or let's say two different ways of structuring data. But there is unstructured data, and this is what is really important, in my opinion, for big data. Not only, but mostly. This is what mainly changes the type of information we collect in big data. Why? Because unstructured information is information that we call usually text heavy. So it is information that is not readily available in numbers. So it is not easy to correlate or to regress in statistics, for example. What kind of things I'm talking about? Pictures, YouTube videos, or status update. I am feeling sad in Facebook, for example. That's unstructured information. So no predefined source of data, and no predefined way of organizing the data. What other things? Pictures, videos, GPS locations. Basically, most of social networks are unstructured information. We do have, however, some structured information available. Let me go through what kind of information we have today from a legal perspective. We do have some legal information available. I've worked for some time on these that I've called legal indicators, so basically rankings and numbers classifying countries according to the quality of their contract law or their rule of law, the quality of arbitration. So this has been produced since the early 2000s, and this information is available in statistics, in numbers. And that information may be useful for certain people. These are different transactions, legal transactions and financial transactions that are operated by different law firms. So you see different places choosing different jurisdictions and different choice of laws for companies and for law firms. So basically those indicators can help companies choosing the right location for dispute resolution or contract enforcement. So this information is available, and then you see numbers here. For example, countries rank according to the quality of their incorporation law, their choice of jurisdiction, what quality of tribunals in the country are, the quality of bankruptcy regulation. So we do have this information readily available in numbers, right? And this is important because part of big data is combining structured information, so this kind of information, for instance, with unstructured information. So that's very much one of the elements of big data, combining structured and unstructured information. Now, what is then different, what changes from this data I just provided, that is mainly collected in the form of indicators and basic statistics, from big data? What is the step forward? So big data is usually defined by 3 V's. I don't know if you talked about that during the last session. Did you? So 3 V's, which are high volume, high velocity, and high variety of information. So these are the 3 distinct elements of big data, which basically require, here you see, new forms of processing to enable decision-making, insight discovery, and process optimization. So here is an important difference between classic statistics because, for example, big data is not interested in knowing the relationship between variables, the nature of the relationship between variables, but is oriented towards decision-making. So it is not finding relations between the variables. It doesn't matter how variables relate. What it matters is that it goes towards an output that allows you to take a decision. It doesn't matter what the nature between the variables that you are exploring are. Okay, so that's completely different. Many statistics will focus on the relationships between those elements that are taken. New forms of processing, we'll discuss that briefly, and let me go into the 3 V's. So this is how basically big data looks like. Different circles of different types of information. I will talk very briefly of the different types of sizes in data that we have. But here you see that as we move out into big data, when we go out, you see that data increases, but also the velocity. You see we move towards real time. So what is interesting in big data is that we are not using old-fashioned data. So for big data, data with 3 months old may be already very old. Depends for what kind of decision. Whereas classic statistical collection of data for companies or governments, they collect information for 25-year records for 25 years. So here, when we move towards big data, we move towards real-time big data. One of the nice examples of big data is when you are taking the metro in any large city, even in Brussels, and then you stop in front of a car that is full, but all those that went before were empty. Well, if we can use cameras within cars in the metros, then we'll realize in what cars there is empty space for new passengers in every station, and then in each station we can show where should passengers stand so they can enter an empty car. You see how real data this is? So this is immediate response to immediate decision to inform the decision of passengers where to take a train, so you don't have to rush towards a train that is empty. What happens here as well is that as big data increases in volume and in velocity, in velocity, it also increases in variety, which basically means that we go from classic database or data reports, the ones I'm talking, sales point information, loyalty card, statistics from sales records or gender or those kind of information that all companies collect, towards SMS, videos, web, photo, audio, all that information that is unstructured. So as we move out, we get higher in size, closer to real time, and all type of information. So that's what is called sort of the big data revolution is going through that. So basically a lot of big data, just some interesting numbers. You know, we produce 2.9 million emails per second. All that can be data mined by big data, using big data. Another interesting 50 million tweets per day. We're going to see why tweets are interesting in big data. 50 million tweets per day. How do you analyze? How do you make decisions based on tweets that people make? So this is what big data will allow. Other interesting information, 24 petabytes. We're going to show you what that petabyte is. Data that Google processes per day. So what happened is that with big data, we had to invent new words. And those new words basically related to the size of storage. So you all know gigabyte, right? And maybe terabyte. But how about pbyte, exabyte, zettabyte, and jottabyte? So these are huge amounts of information, huge storage capacities. And the reason is that, if you see here, 40%, the data is growing at a 40% rate in the world, while investment in IT spending is only 5%. So we do need to catch up for getting more storage for the information that is produced. And a funny information, for example, here, is that 15 out of the 17 industrial sectors in the United States have already more information stored than the US Library of Congress, which is supposed to be the place where the largest amount of information is stored in the world. So 17 out of 15 already have more data stored than the US Library of Congress. Basically, we have stored since 1986 295 billion gigabytes or 295 exabytes. So we are here, right? We are here, and this is 2011. But that wouldn't be a problem if the Chamber of Commerce of the United States hadn't run a study saying that 90% of the information that we have today has been produced in the last 2 years. So we were here, 2011, but 90% of the information that we have stored today has been produced in the last 2 years. So we have a lot of information to store. But since I'm not a specialist in storage, Peter Epps, which is at HEC Paris that works the same place I do, says that storage is not really a problem. That we're going to catch up with storage problems and we can store information. And he basically says that today we don't have to be pessimistic because basically we can store all the information we have in 500 billion 16 gigabyte iPads. So he says, don't worry, we can handle information. We can handle storage. The problem is, how do we extract information from that data? That's the challenge. I was saying, do you remember? I was saying size is not a problem. And size is not a problem because we do have data. We have actually too much data. Storage could be a problem, but we can still solve it technically. But what we need is how to extract information from that data we have. Why do we have so much data? Basically, we have so much data because we are, all of us, let me get that right, walking data generators. Walking data generators. So as we move, we are producing data. So you are logging in at room 206. You are logging in at the library. You are going to a store. You are going to the cash machine. Basically, we can track every movement you have, and you are producing data that is stored somewhere. When you go to the supermarket, when you use your TV, when you call your mom, when you use water, every movement is related to data production, data generation. Every data is stored. So we do have a lot of data. And that data is structured, I remind that, and unstructured. For example, for example, you're feeling a little bit depressed. But does anyone know before you do that you are depressed? Well, a study showed that we can actually know that you are depressed using big data. Basically, what researchers did was they used your iPhone and your location and your messages, the messages you post, and the pictures you post in Facebook. And one of the basic scores that they realized is that if you use, for any of you, around 68 minutes a day Facebook or any social network, you are depressed. Especially if you use it from home, which they can also know you are connecting from home and not from a different network. So basically, these allowed internet providers of medicine or yoga or whatever, if you are receiving too many yoga propositions on your Facebook, you may be depressed. So they can propose go shopping, go take medicine, or go out to a party. If you are receiving those kind of information, you may be depressed according to big data information processing. A second, which I think you probably discussed a little bit last session, is that companies, manufacturers particularly of engines in industrial settings, basically make much of their money in replacing the machines or the engines that do not work. But what they discover is that if they connect those machines to the Wi-Fi and enable a system of data production and processing to check whether the machine will fail in a couple of months, they can repair the machine before it actually fails. So basically, many companies today, manufacturers, make much of their money from repairing machines that are actually working well. Because, according to their data, it will not work properly in the future. So this is all big data processing and companies connecting to big data. And basically, of course, what we know is that because connection to the internet is so simple and we are all connected, it is very easy to gather data. This is all about gathering data. Same here, a company in the United States, Caesars, realized that in Philadelphia, 30% of their 30% of the emergencies were treated in very expensive facilities. So that was costing the company a lot of money. And they realized that by checking on the number of employees using medical services, going to emergency rooms, and whether they were using generic or brand name drugs. So they perform a study on all the employees from around the country, and they realized that in Philadelphia, most of them, 30% of them, were going to expensive urgent care facilities. So they designed a program in Philadelphia, and a couple of years later, it dropped to 17 people using the emergencies and 30% using ER emergency facilities, which basically reduced about 25% the expenses in healthcare. Now, so that's actually different type of information. So we went from depression using your Facebook status, your pictures, your videos you post on Google, to information from sales point and from your health, social security information to process that data. The third point of big data, the third V, is velocity. So velocity actually is not only the speed at which we produce and change the data that is produced, but also that we process and use it for decision making. So before we were having the data, collecting the data, probably very quickly, but the time it took to process it and to use it for decision making was too long. I just show you with the example with the metro, using cameras within the metro cars, that actually decision making takes fractions of seconds by using big data. So basically, big data allows for real-time decision making, and that completely changes for businesses, and we're going to see how it changes for our jobs as lawyers or future jurists. Have you ever heard about this crash of Dow Jones in 2013? basically, the Dow Jones fell 143 points on the 23rd April 2013. Well, the reason why it dropped like that was because there was a tweet by the Associated Press Twitter account that was actually hacked, saying that there was a bomb at the White House and that Barack Obama was injured. So then you said, wow, so that was very quick. So these guys at Dow Jones, they were just checking on Twitter and they realized that there was a bomb and then immediately the stocks went down. Well, no, that's not how it worked. How it worked is that Wall Street, high-frequency trading, uses data mining software to check on Twitters. So it was automatically that the data mining read the Twitter and made the high-frequency trading market react. So there was no human intervention, if you want, in this process. This was the stock market reacting directly to a tweet that was false through big data processing. No human intervention there, besides, of course, the algorithm that was used by Wall Street to get on information from Twitters. Now, let's get into private sector use, now that we have an overall understanding of, just check on time, on big data. So basically, I just mentioned earlier, big data is collecting data. For example, data mining, which I briefly explained, is just checking on information that is available in different forms, pictures, videos, text, extracting information from it. And also structure information, right? So the first step of big data. Second is processing that data, which can be done through statistics or through analytics, using an algorithm, for example. So we can use algorithm for data mining, but also for processing the algorithm. And I promise that certain software companies claim that producing an algorithm is very easy. I tried and I failed. But I was close to produce an algorithm myself. And actually, I didn't fail because of my mathematical capacities, but because my programming capacities, which are extremely limited. But it is actually pretty easy to create an algorithm if you have basic knowledge of programming and almost no knowledge of mathematical knowledge. So you have softwares allowing you for that. And I will show you a concrete example. And then you get the data results, all these velocity, variety, and volume that allow you to have your decision very quickly. This is basically condensed explanation of big data. Now, what big data changes in every sector, including in the legal sector, is that it changes big data for the hypo. I don't know if you have ever seen a person looking like that. Well, it actually means the highest paid person opinion. L'opinion de la personne, the highest paid de la personne payée la plus chère. So basically, it's the hypo versus big data. And what happens is that with big data, we go through 3 different processes. And the claim is that big data provides some sort of objective information that can be used in real time. We are progressing now. Now you're feeling comfortable with, right? And those 3 uses are descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. What really big data really changes is taking us into prescriptive. So descriptive, basically what happened, we do have financial sales or inventory records, that basically table sheets that we have, Excel sheets where we have information recorded, how much did we sell last year, how many products were sold, how much inventory we have. That's basic analytics. Now predictive is what should happen, right? An example is fraudulent credit card transactions. So credit card companies collecting data and checking on when there was a fraud and trying to predict a model, trying to create a model, create a model that allows to predict when certain behavior of a credit card user is fraudulent. So this is basically already used in big data analytics. And they built a model based on previous information to create future prediction of acts. But what is really interesting here is prescriptive. And prescriptive is what you should do today. For example, should you force the execution of a contract. Why should you force an execution of the contract? Let's say, imagine someone that has a loan from the bank. And the bank has credit risk assessment of people, right, getting the loan from the bank. And then they have some classic financial information, credit card payments, mortgages, holiday expenses, sorry, there's a mistake there, school fees, family donations, etc. Well, they can use that data, of course, to predict whether that person will or will not pay the transaction. So this is how it looks, classic charts of statistics for a bank on just using predictive methods. But when it comes to use big data, then the model becomes more complex. Basically, what it allows for the bank is to run an initial exploration of the data. So they will get all structured data, all what I showed before, the structured data that the bank will be using to check on that person, but they can also use unstructured data by creating a logarithm, for example, checking on your Twitters or your Facebook status if you're asking for money to your friends because you cannot pay your loan. So that the bank can access that information if they have unstructured, a logarithm allowing to extract information. So they create an initial exploration of all the data they have, structure and unstructured. They produce what is called a clean model here. They clean that information to only retain the variables that are pertinent, that are a predictor of the phenomenon they want to measure. What they want to measure in credit risk, who has a bad record and who has a good record. To whom should we give money, to whom we should not give money. So that's what they want to know, right? And basically, they clean that information and then they create a pattern, not a pattern based on previous people, but based on an algorithm that allows to identify a model of when people will not pay, even not using previous records. So using just the information you have. We're going to have examples, more concrete examples, because that's complicated, but you have certain behavior that, according to the bank, predict that you're not going to pay your loan. Like, for example, saying, I'm not going on holidays this summer. Maybe you're not having enough money. I'm changing my school, the school for my kid. I'm putting him in this cheaper school. All that is relevant information for the banks. So then you get all that information, and then you have deployment. What basically they do with deployment is they use that model that has been created here, and they put information from all other people that are producing information, data generators, and they try to use that model to check what have these results that will allow what? Many things, among them, to sell you products, marketing, to attract you to the bank, but for us, two interesting examples. First, your performance. Are you in risk of not paying your debtors? So the big data would allow the bank to realize whether they need to pay more attention to your behavior, right? To your behavior, by knowing your actual behavior, your current behavior, through unstructured and structured information. So they may call you and say, hey, do you need an additional loan? Right? For example. Or they might also decide to force the execution of the contract, to try to recover the money they gave you before you cannot pay it. And that's the forced execution. Let me now, I have maybe just it's 10, right? So we still have some time. Let me go into why is this algorithm, how this algorithm performs. This is an algorithm that will be performing the function of knowing whether they should claim the money back from you sooner, right? Let's say you have to pay 1,000. You are expected to finish your loan next year, your student loan. But your behavior, right, according to the model they have created, says that you may be spending more money than you can and you will not pay your loan. So what the bank can do is to call you and offer you a lower, right, a reduction on your loan so you pay it earlier to make sure they will not have to claim to force the execution of the contract. So they can actually modify real time the contract and your payments by using the data that they collect, avoiding a judicial, right, going to the judiciary, for example, to claim the execution of the contract. Now, these algorithms can go even farther. I have some ideas, but I will not bother you with that. But of course, the algorithm can go as far as to block money from your account. So it pays directly the bank if you have allowed for that in your original contract. And the algorithm will produce directly the decision on whether or not to block a certain sum of money in your account. Right? This is where we are going. Now, we have this case of right to be forgotten, where a Spanish citizen requested the Data Protection Agency in Spain to remove an information, an auction sale from his repossessed house in Spain. And every time he was going into Google and he was writing his name, this notice of bankruptcy, let's say, because his house was repossessed, was showing up. So he wanted this information to be erased, both from the server and that Google doesn't show this information anymore. And basically, what is interesting in this case is that the European Court of Human Rights said that actually Google had to remove that information because they had a subsidiary in Europe, that Google was accountable for having that information, and that there was a right to be forgotten, which basically meant that people could modify the information if it was inaccurate, inadequate, irrelevant, or excessive. But that's not the most important part of it. The most important part is how would Google implement this decision? Because this involve checking on hundreds and thousands and millions of URLs. So basically, this decision was implemented through an algorithm. So the way of implementing the decision of the European Court of Human Rights was through an algorithm. Well, this algorithm, the problem we have is, hey, I was not erased from the internet. What happened? Well, the problem is that algorithm provide themselves the enforcement. And one interesting example here is Google. I think you discussed about ID content last week, so I will not go into the detail. But this case, I have to show that, we have no sound probably. So this little boy was dancing to the music of Prince, and actually the video was first blocked by Universal Studios because according to the ID content procedure, it was violating copyrights. Well, what researchers in Israel did is that, you see that? And then this was violating. And what researchers in Israel did is they try to check on why certain videos were blocked, right? Because why certain videos were blocked and not others. The problem of the algorithm is the algorithm is a black box, so we don't know how it works. So in order to check what the algorithm was doing, they used the black box procedure, which basically meant they put inputs to the black box and they just knew the output, but they don't know why. So for example, they recorded a video on TV of a singer, Britney Spears, singing on TV and uploaded it on YouTube. Would it be blocked or not? Making a case study on which kind of videos are blocked or not in order to have some accountability for the logarithm. I will stop here and I will come back to this one and I will give the floor to Cristina, but saying before that the main problem for the algorithm is that algorithms are protected. So in this case, where Viacom sue Google, YouTube, to reveal the logarithm that they were using to control copyrights, actually the Ninth Circuit Court in New York decided that Google was not obliged to reveal the algorithm they were using to control copyright. So basically, there's no way on checking on the algorithm that is extracting information and blocking the information directly.
Does this work? Good. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks for this. So I'm here to talk to you about big data and the public sector. So how the government could use big data, and why do governments should care about big data? Why do you, as law students, should also care about how the government uses big data? So David spoke a little bit about data. Data is all around us, right? Like virtually everything that we do generates data. So just going through the London Underground, you produce so much data that the Agency for Transport in London is able to predict certain behaviors. So how much data? Well, a lot of it. So TfL collects 8 million trips per day. So every time a person goes through the London Underground, they swipe in, they swipe out. So there's a lot of information. You might ask how much data there is. A lot of it. So 2.5 extra bytes per day. That means 2.5 billion gigabytes per day produced since 2012. So it really, by everyone's standards, this is really, really big data. But as David has explained, this doesn't necessarily this is not the only reason why we call big data big. So it's also the 3V. David has just introduced them to you. So what can it do, and why should governments care? Basically, we see there a very minimalistic picture of society. Society is a really complicated thing. Big data can help us understand it better. Why should governments care? Well, really, it is because it could do what a government can do what it already does better, it can do it cheaper, and it can do stuff that it doesn't yet do, and help us deliver services. So a better understanding of society and social activity, both on an individual level and also on a collective level. So analytics can help us uncover hidden patterns, unknown correlations, and formerly impossible insights into social problems. So it can help us deal with problems. It can help us virtually in every respect, from cancer research to predicting terrorist attacks, to making our transport on a daily basis a lot better. So why is it important for the government? It is because it can save a lot of money, and we're talking about a lot of money. So we have here a statistic from the OECD from 2013. It is an estimation, so we don't really know exactly, but they predict that if the 23 biggest governments in Europe would fully employ the data that they have, the administrative costs of the government would be reduced by 15 to 20%. So it's really a lot of money. And then new value would be created. So data also means a lot of money, not only in the private sector, but also for the government. So the estimation of the OECD is that 150 billion to 300 billion euros would be created if these governments would use the full potential of big data. And then we have a statistic for just the British government. And the OECD says that if the government would fully employ it, it would create, from fraud detection and from new value, between 2 and 4 billion pounds. Well, another question you might ask, is the government able to do that? Does it have the data? And is it something new? Well, to some respect, it is something new, and to others respects, it is not something as new. So ever since, say, the Roman Empire, the governments have collected data in order to collect tax, in order to deliver services, and so on and so forth. It so happens that the government is one of the most well-placed agents that we see in our societies from the point of view of data collection. Actually, if you think about the databases that the government has, so just for the British government, it has over 10,000 databases. Why hasn't it used it so far so much? Well, it's mostly because it's more difficult to govern a country than it is to govern a company. So the government has loads of departments, and all of them have collected data separately. It's really quite difficult to build the infrastructure to put that together and to try to understand, to learn from it. But the government collects data that companies in the private sector don't have. So it has very personal type of information. It has information about income. It has information about employment. It has information about health, about lifestyle, so on and so forth. And then there's the question, of course, about why should you care as a law student? As a law student, but also as a citizen, I guess. So as a law student, it is really important to know this because in Europe and in the United States, the British government, the US government, they talk already about how big data is game-changing in law enforcement, as well as in criminal justice and in taxation. So we already have this impact that we feel at these three levels. Not so much in what concerns lawmaking and law practice, but we expect that this impact will soon be visible as well. As citizens, why do I care? Well, really, it can affect everything that you do. So policy making, well, brief definition is what governments do. Governments, and especially local governments, can use big data in order to provide a better way for you to get to work, in order to provide a better solution for hospitals to provide healthcare and Medicaid. It can provide, indeed, better administered services for criminal justice. So really the question is, does this work? And do we have so many examples? We have some examples. Most of them are coming in the public sector from the British government and the American government. And indeed, most of them, I tried to select some that come from a national level, but most of them are coming from local level. So cities are becoming, you probably heard about the concept of a smart city. So it's mostly the local government that is using data for providing its citizens better services. So I have here an example from the HMRC, which is the government non-ministerial agency that deals with tax collection in the UK. In 2010, excuse me, it has established this program called Connect. It has cost the British government quite a bit of money, so £45 million. But as we will see, it has also saved the British government a lot of money, so a lot more money. What was the purpose of this? Really to find undeclared tax, so to find tax evaders. So how does it work? So this computer system puts together databases from so many sources. So not only bank accounts, databases from the local councils, from the land registry, so the government knows what property you're owning, but also from eBay. I don't know if you're expecting this at all. I was personally surprised to find out, and from Gumtree. So for example, if you are posting on Gumtree an announcement about renting an apartment, a house that has, say, 4 rooms, and you only pay tax for an apartment that has 2 rooms, well, the government is really able to see this and probably start an investigation against you. So Gumtree, eBay, Facebook, and Twitter increasingly. And then what does it do? So it puts this together. That's the beauty of big data. That basically integrates everything. So it's able to make an image of people from data. So various aspects of their daily life are put together. So it establishes this individual profile which it matches against the information that the taxpayer has provided, the HMRC. Well, and indeed, if there are discrepancies, this agency will start an investigation and try to get their money back. Well, you might ask, has this worked? Well, yes, so we have very recent data from the Telegraph and the BBC, so October and June, that say indeed that it has worked, and the British government was able to collect recover really 3 billion extra tax using the Connect system. So really what we can see here is that the collection of the HMRC, the tax collected, has increased so much after the implementation of the Connect system that it has really doubled, more than doubled from 2012 to 2013. It doesn't seem so impressive for 2015, 2016. That's because we're still expecting to collect some data in the UK, some data and some money, I suppose. But also, people have, and we'll talk in the end of this presentation, people have some doubts, mostly because that means that the government knows a lot about you. Are you comfortable with that? Well, we know from certain scandals that have happened, especially in the United States, that people are not so comfortable about it. Why? We'll talk about it towards the end, but it's mostly because people fear that governments become too powerful. So fears about security and fears about privacy. So this is a second case study. It's also from the UK. It comes from the Home Office, which is the Ministry of Interior, deals with law enforcement, as you might guess. So the Home Office has implemented this, what they call the predictive police, which what it tries to do is really to try to forecast certain locations and hotspots. So the police has observed that the crimes, they have a certain regularity, so they collect data about certain types of crimes, for example, like burglaries. They notice, for example, that when a burglary happens, there is a higher probability that other burglaries might happen around a certain area. So what happened is that the police is able to detect that and is able to send a foot patrol in order to check that area, that specific area. What does this mean? It means that the police is able to be more effective, and it's able to do policing with less people, in a way. So was this a success? The British government has some data about it, and it says that the projections that they did by using that forecasting hotspot program was 78% in comparison to 51% accuracy using traditional techniques. Traditional techniques, in a way, do statistics, but not so complicated as big data does. So big data does statistics, but also is able to predict more using some very complicated mathematics that probably we won't be able to explain very well here. It's able to do other types of insights and discover other types of patterns in the data it collects. So it's a lot more effective. There's also a case study that comes now from the United States. As you may know, Medicare and health services in the US are a big problem. They cost the taxpayer a lot of money, and also they cost the government a lot of money. So the problem that they have identified was that that fraud was costing the taxpayer the most money. So what they tried to do was to collaborate since 2010 with IBM on a program called Fraud Prevention System. So the aim of this was to ensure that correct payments are paid. So the medical services, different Medicare providers, were able to check whether a certain person has tried to obtain payment for the same service more than once, or say more than 24 hours in a day or something like that. So how does it work? In a way, they all work in the same way. So this creates a very big database, puts together data from different sources, from different healthcare providers. And then the system is able to look and to try to identify suspicious behavior. And does it work? Indeed, this type of investment you'll see is quite expensive. So they were able to recover the investment that they did. So for each dollar that they invested, they recovered $3. And then they also were able to start more investigations and also to prevent more fraud. So towards the end, there was, I think, the challenges and opportunities we wanted to discuss with you. David will take over towards the end. A few concerns. So we got the chance to discuss a little bit the concern about privacy. So is it invasive? The government knows very much about it. The concern is really that some very powerful men, politicians, will take over the power and will treat citizens very paternalistic way. So public policy will be changed by that, and the connection between the democratic side of the government and the, say, technocratic part is really lost. So there'll be no accountability. So that's one concern. Then there is also a concern about the ownership of data. So really, that is the $1 million question. What jurisdiction, who owns it? What jurisdiction will any claims to the ownership of that data, in what jurisdiction will they be solved? At the moment, this is a fire mine, a landmine for lawyers. So it depends a lot about who is the service provider. It depends a lot about where the data is stored, and also what use that data has. Also, as we have seen, this is quite an expensive investment for most governments, and this will probably enlarge the gap between some governments and others. So the richest countries will be able to invest in that. It's quite a difficult infrastructure to build when you don't have data literate people. So you need, as David was just mentioning, you need to have people that understand coding, some coding. I don't know how many of you can write code. Probably some of you, but I don't know how many people in the government know how to do it. So you need some coding, some mathematics. It's quite difficult to train the civil servants for that, and it's quite expensive. So it's not only the infrastructure that the governments need to build, but also the people that they need to train. I think I'll just hand it over to you.
Just to finish up with some basically opening the discussion and giving you a little bit of what we predict without using big data, but just using our brains. Big data is taking us in the near future, especially now for law practice and for lawyers working in law firms, or even for legal counsels of firms. One of the first things is that managers in corporations, and then I do have data about it, and clients in law firms usually and often want to know about the risk. the risk of something. The risk of, for example, investing, having a property, creating a new company in a country when they have to undertake infrastructure, or just a very basic question that every client asks to his lawyer or her lawyer is, what are the chances that I win the case? Right, this is one of the very basic questions that every lawyer has to face with his or her client, and that every legal counsel has to address from his managers, is about how, what are the risks of undertaking certain legal operation. For example, what are the risks for BNP of being caught when operating transactions with Cuba and other countries under embargo measures in the United States. So basically what big data allows is to create legal risk assessment on real time. So I just mentioned the case of the contract. When you have a loan contract, when do you have to enforce? Do you have a clause allowing your bank to claim earlier the money if in a certain circumstance the person is likely to not pay the loan back according to a prediction made by big data? And that's, I'm not telling you this is not the future, this is the present I'm talking about, right? So legal risk assessment, for example, for banks getting loans, but also checking on, for example, what is the likelihood that your client's property gets expropriated in a different country where he has investments. So you can also check what is the trend, right, of expropriation in a certain country, and how are agencies in a certain administrative agencies operating, and what are the administrative agencies tweeting, and what are they requesting as documents, and basing that information or correlating that information with information that is already available for big data providers. Now, when I talk about big data, and that is important, I think, it doesn't mean that if you have a law firm or if you're a company, you have to run your own big data. Well, you can outsource your big data. So there are companies running for you big data, and then you have to know to what extent you want to transfer, or you can transfer that information to the big data provider. But you can also buy information. One of the very polemic cases was American Express selling data about its clients on to other companies using that information for predicting or assessing legal risk. So basically, and very important, breach of contract is one classic example where big data has a tendency to be used in the future. What are the risks that a contract is not respected, and whether you want to enforce that contract before it is actually not respected by the other party without having recourse to a judicial or administrative procedure. So that's an important use of legal risk. And of course, you have the use of legal risk in the financial sector, fraud, and the evolution of prices in the stock market. I want to finish this presentation, but one important thing is all this, and we talk about the 3 V's, right? Velocity, variety, and volume. Thank you. You were following. But there is one more, veracity. And is that the data is right and relevant. And I will tell you that because there is this very specific case in which I was somehow linked to. I will not disclose because it was a big failure, but I was linked to, and it's this case that is something.org. They created a campaign to donate sport equipment to youth in need. So they were trying to collect donation of sport equipment for that organization. It was an organization based, I think, in California. And basically what they did is they created a YouTube video, right, where they explained what was the donation about, the activities and everything, expecting that people will donate. So basically they posted the video featuring YouTube celebrities, very famous video. It was viewed 1.5 million views for kind of a small organization just for donating sport equipment. Everyone was extremely happy. €0 in donations, no donations. So huge success, but no money. So huge success for the video, but no money and no sport equipment. So what it basically means, if you remember when I was talking about choosing the variables that will enter into big data processing, that's what I'm talking about. If you are entering wrong data, wrong metrics, anything you'll get afterwards will be irrelevant. And that is why, and I wanted to finish with this because this is the human face of big data. It needs brains thinking about what is relevant in this big data processing. And when we talk about law, we need a lot of legal technical knowledge to understand what are the variables that are relevant, for example, for predicting a breach of contract. So big data is not making your studies useless, it is making your studies even more important because you will be the ones in the future very much defining what are those variables that will be there that have to be chosen so big data works for you, for your company, or for your client. I will stop here and then we'll open the floor for questions. Et évidemment, on va répondre en français si c'est nécessaire.